Welcome everybody to day 2 of the 2021 Vermont Organics Recycling Summit, organized by the Composting Association of Vermont in partnership with the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources. This year's summit is being held during International Compost Awareness Week, the largest and most comprehensive education initiative of the compost industry. For folks who don't know me, I'm Natasha Duarte, the director of the Composting Association of Vermont. I'd like to start by giving a huge thank you to all of our amazing sponsors who are hanging in with us for this virtual format. These include Community Bank, Eco Products, Vermont Natural Ag Products, Addison County Solid Waste Management District, AgriLab Technologies, EcoPixel, Nature Cycle, the Vermont Produce Program of the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, and the Eco-AmeriCorps program from the Department of Environmental Conservation. This session's featured sponsor is Community Bank. Josh Jarvis wasn't able to join us today, unfortunately, but he did send this along for me to share. He says Community Bank NA is proud to be a sponsor of the 15th Annual Vermont Organics Recycling Summit and the Composting Association of Vermont. While we typically serve to meet our clients' financial needs, we take a great deal of pride in supporting our local communities, especially when it comes to improving soil health, water quality, and environmental resistance. Stop into one of our local branches to see the community difference, and happy composting. So thanks again to Community Bank for being a perennial sponsor of the summit. Just a couple other things before we get into today's session. I'd like to highlight a new initiative of the Composting Association of Vermont, Changing Lives Through Compost, One Scrap at a Time, a multi-generational statewide art challenge. This project started when I worked with Paul and Winsong Kervik to create a 2021 food scrap story calendar that features photographs of the interesting designs and artistic layout of that they found in their food scrap buckets. They took these great photos and we put them into a calendar. And then seeing the calendar on her grandmother's wall, 4-year-old Neoma created her own food scrap art here in these circles. And we were really motivated by the creativity, and there was a lot of interest from multiple partners. So we're launching this week, this multi-generational statewide art challenge as an education and outreach activity. Submissions will be featured on the CAV website, and some will be selected for our 2022 calendar. And you can learn more on the CAV website under projects or at compostingvermont.org/foodscrapart. Today's session is the Compostables, Disposables, and Durables. Just a quick shout out for our 3 o'clock sessions, food scrap diversion strategies for multi-unit complexes, and our virtual tour is Windham Solid Waste Management District's compost facility. We hope everyone will be able to join in some of these sessions and the other sessions throughout the week. And with that, I'm going to pass things over to Dan Goosen. Dan Goosen started at Intervale Compost in 2003 and has been managing the compost operation at the CSWD Organics Diversion Facility since 2008. Dan spends a lot of time with people and working with numbers, but is most happy at work on those occasions when he gets to climb a mountain of compost or spend a day screening a finished pile. When not at work, Dan enjoys beekeeping, growing food, and spending time with his family. And with that, I'll pass it over to Dan.
Thank you, Natasha. And thanks to CAV for putting this together. I know a lot of people contributed to make this happen. Thanks to Vermont DEC for sponsoring it, as always. It's jumping ahead of myself here. It's a really great thing to be a part of, and we're really looking forward to this particular session. I'm going to be starting us off, but then I'm going to be joined by 2 great speakers who also work in this arena, and it's going to be a great conversation. Glad that you're all here to be a part of it, both those who are joining locally in Vermont, and I know we're joined by others out of the state, which is a great benefit of doing it virtually, so thanks for that. We're going to start the story at my facility, which is the Chittenden Solid Waste District Organics Diversion Facility here in Williston, Vermont. It's home to Green Mountain Compost, and we're now entering our the first decade at this facility. We are the largest food waste composter in the state, and we handle about 5,000 to 6,000 tons of food per year, which is always a changing number, but that's currently about where we're at. And though we've only been at this current location for the past decade, we're quickly approaching 3.5 decades of total existence as Vermont's largest food scrap composting facility. Making a high quality compost has always been our goal, but maximizing diversion from the landfill was cemented as a dual mission when CSWD took over ownership and we became this municipal composting entity in 2008. So in general, we think we do a pretty darn good job at both pieces of that goal. But over the last couple of years, particularly following the full maturation of Vermont's universal recycling law in July this past year, we've seen some conflict between the two goals. We've seen a steady increase in the tons of food scraps arriving at our facility over the past decade, with substantial increases in just the past few years. You can see on this chart, this is broken down by month over the last decade, and that little dip in the recent past was COVID. So the second quarter of 2020, we did see a huge hit when all the restaurants shuttered up, the schools shuttered, and food waste everywhere was just, people were eating from home, but less of that was getting to us. So otherwise, you can see a steady increase and a quick rebound once we got through the initial part of the pandemic. So our challenge is that food waste is not always food waste. For many years now, we've allowed certified compostable products, including liner bags, plates, trays, cups, and cutlery, and other food service items to come in with the food. And due to the scale of incoming material, we've not always been able to go through every bag and make sure that what is in there is one of those certified compostable items, or even the bags themselves. And as a result, you always get some lookalikes or some non-lookalikes that people are just put in the wrong container. But sometimes, a lot of times, it's a mix of the two. You're probably all familiar with what these things look like by now, but if you haven't experienced compostable products, they take many forms and often look very similar to their traditional plastic and plastic lined counterparts. So, you know, if you weren't looking very closely at these, you might assume that they're styrofoam, polystyrene, and the like. So being able to tell apart the potentially compostable products from the traditional plastics and treated fiber products can be extremely confusing for individual consumers. It's even confusing for us, and we deal with it every day. It really requires looking at each individual item and sometimes, you know, bringing them inside and researching them online to see, do they indeed have the certified compostable certification, or is it something that's being marketed as biodegradable instead? And going through them individually is just not an option at the scale at which we process materials. And this is not a new problem. I include this slide as a presentation on the similar topic I gave a decade ago. And really what's changed the most since then is just the volume of materials coming in that are certified compostable. Some of the formulations have improved, certainly, but really we've seen more and more and more of them coming from all directions, and it's creating a problem for us. We've seen an explosion in the popularity of them. And as you allow more of these in, or as we get more of them in, we are also seeing more of their lookalikes. So the more traditional plastic counterparts. And this is kind of an initial result. This is from our old screening process. We would screen early on, and this is the overs. And you can see it's just riddled with non-food, non-wood, non-yard waste things. Some of those are traditional plastic bags. Some of them are certified compostable and haven't broken down. But overall, it's a mess, and it's an expensive one to deal with, more processing and the like. Here's another example. There's Norms going through what's mostly a great load of produce and certified compostable bags, but in the mix were some liner bags that were not certified compostable. And even some of the ones that you would think would break down most readily. Here's a fiber based liner or tray rather. These individually, one at a time, if exposed to the appropriate amount of moisture and microbiology, will break down fairly readily within our piles. But the problem is they often come stacked. And so even these, no bioplastics involved, these can be problematic as well. So we are forced to pick these materials out in order to maintain a high quality finished product. And we're changing how and when we're doing this within our process recently. We've undergone some significant upgrades in terms of our handling. And so with our new setup, these are our new windrows. We started by going through and picking material by hand. We quickly switched to mechanized systems for that. You can see an alarming amount of plastic there and in amongst the windrows. And then we collect it and we dispose of it. And it costs a lot of money. It takes an awful lot of time. And it's all due to the fact that this material that we don't want is coming in. And so we've been forced to reckon with it. So while it's been growing over the last couple of years, our contamination issue, it really started ramping up, I would say, a year and a half ago in anticipation of the universal recycling law. We saw more and more participation in that and just a huge uptick in the tonnage. And as you might expect, as you go from voluntary participation, folks who have been composting and diverting organics for a very long time, as luckily we have here in Vermont, to a more more mandatory situation, folks who've never done it before, they're going to inherently be less careful about what they're putting in their compost bin. Or they may be careful and they just are uninformed. It's probably a big combination of those two. Regardless, we've seen more as we've gotten closer to that threshold, getting down to the residential level on that diversion mandate, that law, which went into effect last year, just an increase in overall stuff that is not food waste coming in. And so this is what we're dealing with. So we actually, also, we have a windrow turner that is exacerbating the problem a little bit. That only came into play this past winter. And the turner is highly beneficial in terms of the efficiency and savings on equipment repair, maintenance, diesel, and labor, but it has the slightly detrimental effect of taking big plastic and making it into smaller pieces. So that can be, it's exacerbating what was already a growing problem for us. So what is a municipal compost facility in this situation to do? We debated about it internally for over a year, and we came to a very difficult conclusion, one that I've been, kind of pushing for a while, but, we are a solid waste entity and we're trying to maximize diversion, and it was not met without a lot of pushback, but we finally came to the conclusion that we were not going to accept compostable products by and large, starting a year from when we made this announcement in January. So we decided status quo was no longer an option if we were going to continue to be able to sell be able to sell compost the way we have for decades without incurring massive subsidies. So this coming January 2022, we'll no longer be accepting cups, plates, utensils, or foodware of any kind, even if it is certified compostable. And so we sent that letter out to our largest stakeholders, did some Zoom meetings, and tried to get the word out as much as possible to give them a full year's warning before we implemented that ban. We believe this change is going to allow us to finally differentiate between the inputs that are beneficial to the compost versus those that are problematic. So here's the new acceptance list for us starting in January. And essentially, there's some non-food items in there like bamboo stirrers and wooden stirrers, but by and large, should allow us to be able to look at any incoming load, even if it's 10 or 12 or 15 tons, and fairly quickly be able to go through it and determine, is this food or is this a liner bag or is this something different? And actually enable us to have a contamination policy that we've struggled with for a long time because of the fact that the visual differentiation is so difficult. So the exception to the compostable products ban is certified compostable liner bags. That is because the yuck factor is a real thing. You know, we recognize that because we're not doing our own hauling and we're dependent on other people to do the hauling, that having liner bags in there is going to facilitate a lot more diversion of this material than if we didn't allow those. There's severe limitations to do no liner bags. There are certainly lots of but we recognize that we needed them in there if we were going to not have a significant decrease in diversion. So for now, we are accepting them. So that's what's going on in Chittenden County. But what about the rest of the state? There's people on this from all over the state. And while we handle the majority of the food waste, there are a lot of other people also handling food waste statewide. Here's a fairly current list put out by A&R. And I've highlighted the yellow stars. There are the 3 compost facilities in the state that currently, as of today, are taking these products. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, but you see there's all those numbered circles on there represent other facilities that taking food waste. And as of January, when we get compostable products market, there will only be 2 compost facilities left in Vermont that accept these materials. So those are the 2 stars in southern Vermont. The Long Trail Compost, formerly TAM Organics, is accepting them still, as is Wyndham Solid Waste Management District's Brattle Grow compost program. So for the rest of the state, excuse me, I was unable to speak with everybody or all of the other composters, but as far as I'm aware, nobody is accepting compostable plastics, and then a couple of them might take small amounts of fiber materials, but otherwise it's pretty much just food and potentially soiled paper. Excuse me. So in addition to the compost facilities, the couple red stars there highlight a couple other facilities that are not composters, but who are taking in material, hauling material, food waste, organics, and doing other things with it. So Grow Compost has a subcontract through AgriCycle, and they're taking food waste, picking it up in much of the state now and hauling it to Agri-Energy in Exeter, Maine for their anaerobic digester there. And Casella Waste Systems out of Williston, that's the red star right here in Chittenden County. They have just, Trevor mentioned a little bit about it this morning, but they have just started their depackaging facility here in Williston and are depackaging organics and transferring those to a number of digesters within the region. So while none of the compostable products that go to those facilities actually end up being composted, I believe they are still allowed to be in the mix at a certain, they have limits to how much what they would consider contaminants would be allowed in there. But as far as I know, they still accept them, and then they get pulled out for landfill. Or in Maine, they probably get incinerated generally. So to get a better sense of what's going on in the rest of the country, it's fortunate timing. This group, the Sustainable Packaging Coalition, has just released this report. It came out in January, and they take a really in-depth look at the state of compostable packaging acceptance and hurdles for further implementation and acceptance nationwide. So this is available online if you go to sustainablepackaging.org. They are a project put out by Green Blue, which is their parent organization. And you go to greenblue.org and you can see they've got a bunch of really neat maps and infographics that kind of paint the picture for what the state of the state is for compostable plastics nationwide. And if you look at this first one, it doesn't look like too bad of a story. There's all those green dots represent areas that do allow some degree of compostable packaging. However, I'm not sure how accurate it is, because when I zoomed into Vermont, there are 2 green dots there. One of them is our facility, which of course will be going offline in that regard in January. And then Black Dirt Farm is the other one there, and they take just fiber-based materials. I didn't talk to Tom to confirm that, but I'm pretty sure that's still accurate. But it doesn't have either Bennington or Windham facilities on the map. So I don't know. I would anticipate there's some other inaccuracies on here as well. But still, that's what the picture they paint. And then here's the current overall picture showing all the compost facilities that they were able to map, which again is certainly not comprehensive, but has more, more facilities on there. And in this one, the green dots here represent the facilities that they believe are accepting all compostable products, including bioplastics. And the red or orange, kind of dark orange, reddish ones are the ones, I guess the red ones are just yard waste composting. So, quite a few of those that don't take food or compostable products. But, the green, what looked like a sea of green is less of a sea of green when you look at it in the overall context. And I think that's important. The report outlines that roughly 15% of the composting facilities in the country take some form of compostable packaging. So 85%, of course, then would not. And then roughly 11% of the US population has access to a facility that take these materials. So they're trying, there's concerted efforts by industry to kind of increase those numbers. But it's still, they're starting after a couple of decades at it. Relatively very few people in the country who have access to facilities that will take these materials. So my question is, of the estimated 11% of the population in the US that has access to these facilities, how many of the billions of pieces of compostable products that are being marketed and sold throughout the country actually make it into compost? And given that some of the pretty large facilities on that map that they're using, I know don't actually compost the compostable products that come in, rather they get screened off for landfill or incineration. I would argue that's a very small proportion of what's being marketed and sold. So why aren't more compost facilities accepting these materials? It's a bunch of, I think, the compostable products industry, excuse me here. The compostable products industry claims that with less reliance on fossil fuels, a lower carbon footprint, less pollution, increased diversion of organics, and even a potentially positive contribution to the compost recipe, that they should be more widely accepted. But the experience of composters on the ground usually paints a different picture, and there are just as many reasons not to accept these products as there are reasons to do so. A few years back, a group of the largest composters in the state of Oregon signed onto a letter stating why they don't accept compostable packaging and serviceware. It's a good list, one that I agree with almost all of those points, and it's worth checking out in more depth if you have time. There's the link at the bottom there. Excuse me. But I think number 7 is the most important to me, and it states, just because something is compostable doesn't mean it's better for the environment. And their point with that is about a study that the Oregon DEQ put out, kind of challenging the notion that compostable products have a lower environmental impact than their mainstream counterparts. There's been a lot of effect to that study. They're still debating, who's right on that argument. But I think it speaks to a bigger point, in that despite massive amounts of money being spent by consumers who are trying to do the right thing, trying to do what's green, purchasing greener single-use disposable versions of the products, that very few of them actually make it to compost. And problems abound for the ones that do. We've been filling the world with single-use disposable items for nearly 3/4 of a century, and compostable products are just the tip of the iceberg, I think. It's a global challenge for us. And I would challenge that rather than creating more products that make this lifestyle easier, We need to buck the trend and start the task of finding alternatives. There's nothing sustainable about the status quo, and with a bit of effort and creativity, I believe we can right the ship before it's too late. So, well, I don't have the answers to what's next and what's the best option for us moving forward as we shut the door to these products. I'm delighted to share. There are lots of people working on it, including some terrific entrepreneurs and leaders within institutions right here in our own community. And we're going to hear from them as soon as we do a screen share swap. So I'm going to stop sharing, and we will be joined by Marissa Watson in a moment. So Marissa Watson is the Sustainability Manager for UVM Dining with Sodexo, managing plastic waste reduction and local food purchasing on campus in resident and retail dining. Her work in the food systems has been informed by previous careers in organic farming and television production with National Geographic, as well as from her education with the University of Georgia, having received an MS in agricultural economics. So Marissa, please tell us what's underway at UVM.
Well, thank you, Dan. Thank you so much for having me, everybody. I hope to be able to add to this conversation. I actually met Dan and I'm here today because we were talking about how to handle single-use waste at the university. Excuse me, I have two screens here, and so I'm looking at my notes over here, but I am focused on you all. I met Dan because we were trying to figure out what to do with single-use waste here at the University of Vermont. As we move into this new era of not being able to compost compostable packaging. And so just a little bit of background about our program. We do run EcoWare at UVM. This is an alternative to single-use waste. It's a container that is reusable, and I'll get into some of that in a minute. We do still have a Simply to Go program where students can grab and go pre-made salads and sandwiches and that sort of thing. And as the sustainability manager, I worked with Brandon Williams, our executive chef, about 2 years ago over the summer, actually with eco products, to move a lot of our plastic single-use containers to compostable single-use containers, with the understanding that we could compost them through Dan's facility. And that was a big supply chain move for us. It requires a lot of coordination. In total, we serve about 10,000 meals per day here on campus. We are a rather large facility. We like to say we're the largest restaurant in the state of Vermont. I don't know what percentage of that is single use. Most of the food that we serve is in unlimited dining halls on china, on reusable china with silverware that we run through the dishwasher. But some of it is single use. So back in 2011, before my time, I've been in this role for about 3 years now. My predecessor piloted the idea of EcoWare. So it's these green, we use the Aussie containers. And when they ran the pilot, we originally charged students $7.50, which covered the cost of about 2 EcoWare containers one time. And they could use the containers in 2 of the 17 locations, Brennan's and Marche. So those were packed into by our chefs. And then as the years progressed, we modified it, we expanded it. We now offer EcoWare in all of our 17 locations. So for those of you unfamiliar, there's sort of 2 styles of dining on campus, resident and retail. So resident is your typical cafeteria style, where you would come in, you would take as much as you care to eat, and then you would sit down, and then you would leave the dining hall. In addition to that, in resident dining, we also allowed students to take one carry-out container with them at breakfast and lunch. Now, this is pre-COVID. And then in retail, students could order and they could have it packed into an EcoWare container, and then they could carry it out of the retail location. Retail simply just means that it's a la carte. So it's you pay for an item per the dollar amount, and then you would typically walk out of the dining hall, though you could sit and eat if you cared to. After 2011, again, sometime between 2011 and 2017, like I said, we expanded that program all across campus. Then, COVID hit, and we had to reimagine it for health and safety reasons. We did work very closely with our Vermont Department of Health. We're highly regulated by the state, and they did allow us to continue to use these containers during COVID because we clean them. So they do go through a dishwasher that that gets up to about 180 degrees Fahrenheit. So they said that it would kill all the germs. We didn't need to worry about contamination or making anyone sick, because safety is our #1 priority. But we were happy to be able to offer the EcoWare containers. While we did have a couple other programs that we had to put on pause. One being that students used to be able to carry in their own coffee mug and fill up their coffee mug so that they didn't have to take a single-use cup with them. And we had to put that on pause per Department of Health regulations during COVID. We do anticipate that will come back post-COVID. And as a lot of us have seen, the CDC now says that it's okay that the transferable COVID is likely not transferable through surfaces, but more in the air. And so I anticipate that as we sort of move out of this and more people become vaccinated, I don't know, I don't work for the Department of Health, but I would imagine that we're going to see more sort of China and reusables come back online. However, last July, this was all still new to us. And so we did decide to use the EcoWare containers in order to reduce our plastic consumption and compostable single-use consumption on campus. But we had to redesign it because students could no longer go around and serve themselves in the resident dining halls. So we, I guess I should say, at the same time, launched a new mobile ordering app. So students would place an order on our Bite system. Oops. Excuse me, they would place an order on our Bite system, and then our chefs would pack into the EcoWare container, and then students could pick up their to-go order without coming into the dining hall. And that was to mitigate, to reduce our numbers, because now we had capacity limits in the dining halls. So that's sort of an overview of how it's evolved, sort of from inception to pre-COVID and now post-COVID, and I'll get into a little bit more as we move forward here. Again, pre-COVID, we also offered a 25-cent discount in retail, and we, found that annually we were replacing about 17,000 disposables. The 25-cent discount was an incentive to encourage students to choose EcoWare over the single-use containers. At the same time, we also started offering sporks for sale. You could purchase them for $2, and you would get a 5-cent discount in retail locations. And again, that replaced about 2,800 disposable forks and spoons. You can see in school year 18-19, it was about 1,100 for the school year. So helping to keep single-use containers out of the waste stream there, again, pre-COVID. And then again, the redesign in the fall, this is just to give you an example. I mentioned that we had launched an online mobile ordering program. So you can see the chef in the foreground is at the Bite station. So what would happen is an order would come in, the chef would take the ticket, pack it, go around to the different stations. This is our Central Campus Dining Hall. It's our newest dining hall here on campus and our largest. So of the 10,000 meals that we serve on campus, about 5,000 meals come out of this kitchen every day. And so it's a pretty happening place. This dining hall came online in 2016. Excuse me, 2017. And so, like I said, it's relatively new. A lot of our kitchen concepts are open so that students can see their meals being prepared. We find that it helps, kind of it helps us be more transparent to our students, which is important. But so the chef would go around and pack the container, pack the EcoWare container with the to-go order. And then you'll see on the next slide, so there's Chef Eric on the left-hand side there packing an EcoWare container, and then in the middle handing it to a student. And part of our redesign was that, so I guess prior to COVID, it was an analog tracking system. So students would take the EcoWare container, they would leave the dining hall, they would come back, they would return it. We would give them a plastic cow tag, which was just a way to mark their participation in the program. A cow tag because Vermont is a dairy state. It was meant to be fun. And then, post-COVID, we didn't want students returning plastic back to us, or we were trying to reduce touch points across the board. So what we did was we stopped tracking. We let students carry out of the dining hall. We didn't make them register in the program. We didn't charge them for the containers. And then we installed on the right-hand side, you can see these 64-gallon roll carts into the residence halls in the first floor of every resident hall. And students could simply return their EcoWare container to the resident hall in the 64-gallon roll cart. The students on the right there are our EcoRep students. They are students who are dedicated to sustainability, plastic waste reduction, and they get paid to once a day check the EcoWare container roll carts in the residence halls, and then return them to our dining halls where our dishwashers then wash the EcoWare containers. And I'd be happy to sort of expand on this a little bit. I think there are some interesting logistics involved. For instance, our dining staff do not have access to residence halls, and that's for student safety. No one but students who live in the residence halls have access to them. So this would not be possible without our partnership with the EcoReps, and then also Corey Berman's department, our zero waste and recycling department, who installed the 64-gallon roll carts. So the whole rollout has been a big partnership initiative across campus, and we're really grateful for our partners. I would say that the biggest challenge to EcoWare is to encourage students to return containers. Now, I mentioned with COVID, we stopped tracking the containers, and we stopped charging students for it. There were sort of two trains of thought there. We didn't charge students for it because we feel like EcoWare is part of the cost of doing business. Typically every year we would order China in the dining halls, and this year, because we have less students dining in due to capacity limits, we instead put that investment into EcoWare. We also had a large investment from the university for this program. University of Vermont administration, they were the driving force behind us running this during COVID-19 because sustainability is a part of the school's value system. And so they were the ones who purchased the containers as a service, as part of our service to students. So that's why we didn't charge them. And as I mentioned, we stopped tracking mostly because I don't know that our return rate was any better with the analog tracking system, with just using a piece of plastic or a carabiner to mark a student's participation. And I think in an ideal world, it would be tied into a student's CAT card. I don't know that the technology for that exists, or I have not found a way to make that work yet. And again, you know, we as UVM Dining provide a service to students, and so we want to make sure that we're getting them what they need. But then the largest challenge is getting students to return the EcoWare containers. My colleague and I have a joke that if we had a nickel for every time we came up with a new marketing campaign to get students to return EcoWare, we'd be pretty rich. I love this slide. Guess who wants you to return your EcoWare? We have digital screens up in the dining halls, and so that's what would run up there. And then you can see the other three are pretty similar. But we are always sort of racking our brains to try and encourage students to return their EcoWare. So to put it into numbers, we did track our EcoWare usage this year pretty closely because we wanted to understand how much was coming back to us. So at the beginning of the semester in August of 2020, we began the school year with about 5,600 EcoWare flat box containers and about 1,300 soup containers. And we had a 37% return rate on flat boxes, which was pretty heartbreaking. That said, you know, we had 5,600 containers, and I know through our Bite mobile ordering app that our usage was about 41,000. And so I guess what I have sort of concluded is that I think that students were returning their EcoWare containers throughout the course of the semester. I think it was that last order where students didn't bring their box back. It wasn't a priority, or they got distracted. They didn't return their EcoWare container. In terms of dollar loss, you know, so I'm going to flip back here for a second. So you can see we had a 37% return rate. We lost about 3,500 flat boxes. That translates to about $16,000. And then if I were to run a cost comparison and find what we would have spent on single-use compostables, we would have spent about $11,000 for, you know, that 41,191 compostable orders. So we did end up spending about 4,000 or 4,600 more for the EcoWare containers than we would have on compostable containers. But we did keep about 600,000 containers out of the landfill or the compost. So, you know, we're still trying to dial this in. I think when we talk about sustainability, human behavior is always the loose cannon. You know, we as humans, our habits are tough and it's hard to change. So I think we're going to keep working with this program. A couple of the takeaways, you know, that we've learned are, again, that we find that EcoWare is just part of our cost of doing business. We're going to continue to dial in the return rate. And we will continue to use a mix of EcoWare and either compostable or recyclable single-use containers for our STG program, which is our Simply to Go program, because we do need some single-use containers on campus for those grab and go. This picture on the right is Middlebury College, and I don't mean any disrespect to Middlebury College. You know, I think, again, it's hard. This is a tough issue. It's complex. I think as Dan said, you know, just as they deal with trying to understand how to make this so that they can have a good compostable soil product at the end of the line, you know, we're on the purchasing side trying to understand what's best given the cycles that we have in place. And so when we went into the pandemic, we had a student who was writing for Vermont Digger who wrote this article comparing Middlebury and University of Vermont. And it was nice press for University of Vermont because we didn't have this issue because we were using EcoWare containers. Again, and I mean no disrespect towards Middlebury College, because I think it's complicated. It's a really complex issue to try and understand. And, you know, I think now trying to understand what to do, because we don't have a good place for us to put single-use compostable containers. It's, do we go back to recyclable? From a sustainability standpoint, what's our best option? And so I think, change is hard, and we're going to keep working together, as teammates throughout these systems to try and understand how to sort of lift each other up. And I think that's all I have for today. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I know we have some Q&A time at the end here, but thank you so much for having me, and thanks for inviting me on, Dan.
Thanks so much for that, Marissa. That was really illuminating. And I'm sure a lot of people, I knew that when I first heard about what was going on at UVM, even though we're nearby, I had no idea about all the details and the trials and tribulations of trying to roll out an alternative in an institution as large and involved as that one. So I really appreciate your efforts and your programs thinking outside of the box to come up with alternatives. And you nailed it with human behavior being the biggest impediment to making change, I think. And I'm hopeful that, I'm really glad that you guys are experimenting and hope that, with technological improvements, with tracking, I know other places experimenting in this realm are using RFID things, and hopefully there will be a lot more to come, and we can see, the experimentation that you've done leading to good things elsewhere. So thanks again. If there's any immediate clarifying questions, we could address those right now. Otherwise, I think we are going to have time at the end for Q&A.
Yeah, so there are a couple specific questions for Marissa, but I think we can just hold them all, and I'll just work through them and let you guys know who the question is directed at the end.
And if you don't mind, I will just offer that. So we are the dining program, so we're in charge of purchasing, but Zero Waste and Recycling is Corey Berman, and he's in charge of our, our contract with our hauler and all of that. So I'm more on the purchasing side, trying to understand the whole system. And I see some questions here about costs on hauling, and I don't have those details, but I'm sure I could connect you to Corey.
Yeah, maybe if you can add Corey's contact information, if you think that's okay, at the end there in the notes. So thank you again, Marissa, and please stick around. And Marina, if you want to start sharing while I introduce you here. Our next speaker is Marina McCoy. She is a zero waste and recycling expert and founder, CEO of Waste Free Earth. And she's on a mission to build a culture that prioritizes zero waste systems over the current status quo of buying single-use items as trash in landfills. Burying single-use items as trash in landfills. By working in the sustainability field for almost a decade, Marina has developed proven strategies that lower the environmental impact and reduces overall waste consumption for each client she works with. Marina has been recognized numerous times for her work in publications and news outlets. Most recently, she was awarded Vermont's Young Entrepreneur of the Year, BBSR's Young Changemaker, Vermont's 40 Under 40, nominated for 1% for the Planet's Pinnacle Award, Unleash Passion Every Day, and named a pioneer and expert in her field by the Burlington Free Press. So thank you very much, Marina, and we look forward to hearing what you're up to these days.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan. And thank you, everyone, for having me here. As Dan said, I am the founder CEO of Waste Free Earth. At Waste Free Earth, we're reinventing the relationship that society has with waste. Together, we need to shift from seeing waste to seeing resources. And our motto is, let's work towards a waste-free earth together. We used to be in the event industry, building zero waste programs for large-scale events all over the United States. Obviously, the pandemic had a pretty severe effect on our business. We were fortunate enough to already be transitioning to doing zero waste consulting work with businesses. So although we got hit pretty hard, we were able to make the transition to mainly now serving businesses. So essentially, we're here to make you less trashy. I go by Sustainability Boss Lady. Our company culture is really goofy, quirky, but straight to the point, and we love building systems funny enough, this is me in compost in Oregon. It was cool hearing Dan bring up the Composting Association in Oregon, because that was actually where we saw the first effect of taking out compostable products. So this was at a festival in Oregon called the Northwest String Summit. And that was like the last time we really used compostable products with them. And I'll speak more to that later on. My information has already been said, so I'll pass on through. So let's talk trash about events. So our method really goes into building a culture, having transparency and elimination. We're really big on elimination of waste instead of diversion. So the culture, we believe in empowering all different stakeholders, making accessible content, making sure people feel supported on all platforms, including internal and external stakeholders. Transparency is also really important to us. As many of us know, sustainability guidelines and regulations change all the time. So we make sure, like, whenever we're working with event, or now, so businesses, I'll just say clients from now on so it's easier. If like something isn't happening right, like especially with the compostable stuff, we let people know on the website through all social media channels saying, this is the best option that we have right now. We're open to other options if you have it, but this is all the other stuff that we're working on too. It's just, there's a lot of greenwashing out there that I'll talk about more, and it's something that we really try to urge our clients to be as transparent as possible, because the more the consumer knows, the more likely they're gonna make more sustainable choices, or at least be aware of their impact, especially waste. There was a case study that showed that when people think that something is recyclable or compostable or better for the environment regarding single use, they actually consume more of it because they feel like it's good for the earth. So we're really transparent that everything has an effect, which leads to elimination. At first, when we got into this field about a decade ago, we were all stoked about diversion rates. We thought that like having a zero waste event was all about diverting 90% of our overall waste consumption out of landfills and into donation, rescuing, upcycling, composting, and recycling avenues. But we quickly found out that to us, a zero waste event isn't solely based on the diversion rate, it's reduction of overall waste consumption for us. So even seeing a decrease in composting and recycling benefits our method and how we view waste, because everything has an effect, and just because we have high composting numbers or high recycling numbers doesn't really speak to the event fully or with our clients. So we really track the whole waste consumption, making sure that we eliminate from all aspects. There's a case study that I have from one of our clients, an overlook at the end of this presentation. It was with MTV, and we were doing their New Year's Eve event for 5 years, and year after year, with more support from them and having more money within our budget, we were able to reduce overall waste consumption by 90,000 pounds within 1 year, which was last year before the pandemic. And the year before, we were able to reduce their overall waste consumption by 30,000 pounds. And this is with an increase in attendees. So in total, after 2 years, we were able to eliminate 120,000 pounds straight from the waste stream. So that was pretty cool from our aspect. So going into the culture, I'll break it down a little bit into each section that we do. So we have the education, messaging all throughout social media channels. So if you're going, again, this is mainly event-based. Oops, I thought I put do not disturb on. This is mainly event-based, and hopefully you could take some information from this and put it towards events that you are doing, or if you have a venue, a place of work, whatever it may be. Hopefully this is of assistance. So back to the culture, education. We make sure that we are educating people at all points of contact. Marissa spoke on this too, but we make a ton of different social media campaigns to get people excited about the reusable system that we're having in place right here. This is at the Telluride Bluegrass Festival. in Telluride, Colorado, with our reusable cup system that we had in place in partnership with Clean Canteen. And just making sure people remember to bring them day after day. We also noticed that de-incentivizing people worked well instead of incentivizing them. Again, like a couple years prior to really the composting regulations being tighter, we knew that compostable products were still single use, and we wanted to like transition out of them as much as possible. And we found that people really didn't care much for the $1 discount that they got with beer cups, but they really reacted to when we would charge them $2 for a single-use compostable cup. So the de-incentivizing helped with us greatly, because then we were able to eliminate half of the single-use compostable cup inventory year after year. So that was really awesome to see. Part of the culture is empowerment. So at the events, we have different games, activities, competitions, and challenges for attendees and even vendors to take part of. We would have a most sustainable vendor award for vendors that went above and beyond. And then for attendees, we had plastic-free challenges, pledges, also when you could call one of your state representatives to push more for plastic regulations and single-use regulations. So again, a lot of fun, making sustainability fun and not boring or feel like they're getting preached to. We also had a ton of workshops, panels, and seminars. We would get artists on board with us. So right in the picture with engagement, we have members from Elephant Revival. We would have connect with Trampling Turtles, like whoever was at the events that we were working, we would ask them to do sustainability shout outs on the stage and also participate in the seminars and panels if they could, along with bringing in experts in the field. Transparency, as I mentioned before, is really important with any client that you work with or any company. So education, this is the signs that we had for the MTV event, Snow Globe. We make sure that everything's at eye level and that we have pictures of the stuff going into the bin along with descriptions too, so that you kind of access both points. We also connected with the app development and had even more engagement opportunity through QR codes so people could learn more about the sustainability program and also learn about what's actually recyclable, landfill items, and compostable. That was a lot of fun to see, and they could also see when all the sustainability stuff was going on. We always had a sustainability booth there too, so anyone could ask questions or play the games with us. Empowerment behind the scenes with the transparency, making staff guides and manuals really helped. This is a picture, not the greatest picture, of one of the staff guides that we had to go into what each department is supposed to do at the beginning of an event, and then at the end. It used to be that sponsors or partners or food vendors would come in, kind of trash the area and leave. Like they would pick up a little bit, but for the most part, not that much. So then we also started finding people, which I'll get into later. Lots of trainings, and we had department competitions. So on site, there typically are multiple bars. So we had the bars compete against each other on who had like the best sorted stuff behind the scenes, like the compost was super clean, same with the recycling, and if they were able to fill up more reusable cups through the messaging that they had, which goes into the reminder signage. And it's different kind of than the educational signage with the waste diversion stuff, because we found out that having signage at the waste stations was great, but it also didn't build that whole culture of sustainability and remind people throughout the event, especially before they started having a little bit too much fun once the nighttime came. So having these reminder signage throughout the event. Right here is one that we did with Winter Wondergrass where it says leave no trace as they're exiting, but we also had stuff around the bar reminding people to bring their reusable cup. And if they don't, because they got a free cup with the ticket, they'll get charged $2 for a compostable cup, reminding them that we have a sustainability booth there. Also that all the stuff from the food vendors is compostable. as well, just like random signage throughout. And then we would also hang all of the stats we had from the following years and years prior, which was really great for the attendees to see the effect that they were having on the environment in a positive manner. As we know, the average American produces 4.5 pounds of waste per day. And when we were working events, it typically ran from 1 to 1.3 pounds that the standard festival attendee would create. And that's with like the pre-event waste and the post-event waste. We noticed in the field that a lot of events, especially outside lands in San Francisco that we later got asked to do, they were only counting their waste at the event and not the pre-setup and then the post. So they were actually pretty wasteful on both ends except during the festival. So that's, again, why we are kind of apprehensive with the diversion rate, and then like why we're really big on transparency too, because they didn't really state that the diversion rate or the waste that they created was just during the event. So we definitely are big on accountability. And then the elimination. So with all of the like culture empowerment and the transparency, the elimination of waste comes a lot easier. So we are really big on the messaging, the culture empowerment, like I mentioned before, because once people understand the why behind their choices, whether like, okay, still using single-use compostable products has an effect, I shouldn't just automatically reach for them. I should bring my own utensils, since that was easier for us as well too, because we didn't have to worry about washing them. It's just the attendee uses it back and forth. And same with reusable hankies, napkins of that sort. But again, it was cool to see year after year how the attendees grasp on to all the programs that we had, and even knowing what to bring without looking at all the stuff, and how they could be a zero waste attendee themselves. With the elimination, education, again, is really, really important. We actually have contracts with all stakeholders for accountability. So we have contracts with the food vendors that they have to comply with our sustainability, not regulations, but programs. On this truck, you could see a little sign that we have there that says all the stuff is compostable and verified through us. So everything from that and all the food vendors were compostable. We don't allow any single-use beverages that come in plastic, no granola bars, nothing wrapped in plastic. And if we find out that they aren't adhering to those programs, we actually had the authority to cease their sales until they complied with it. And that goes with sorting as well too. And how we've made things a lot of fun is by having competitions on who is the most sustainable food vendor, and sponsor and all that stuff too, but each department kind of competed against each other and got like free entry the following year if they were nominated the most sustainable one. And it wasn't just about waste, it was also about like how they traveled here, where they're sourcing their food, all things like that. We had a whole rubric for. Same with the sponsors and the partners of the event. And we have had some food vendors not want to work events with us because of how strict our programming is, which was interesting. And even some sponsors dropped once they saw our intense in a good way sustainability programs. But that also brought in more sponsors actually, that want to support the sustainability program. So in one instance, Toyota came on as a sponsor for one of the events just for a couple $1,000s. And then after they saw our whole sustainability guidelines and contract, they actually bumped up their sponsorship to about $15,000. And then MTV also just kept on throwing more money into our budget. So that's how we were able to get those high waste elimination numbers. Again, the empowerment. So it's not like we're just giving all these stakeholders the sustainability guidelines without helping them along the way. So we have meetings with them. We do like a quick supply chain support guidance and analysis with them. it got to the point where with the compostable products, there was so much greenwashing, and we really were being as sensitive to the compost facilities as possible to make sure that they were feeling value, because we sorted through everything 2 times with the compost, but still things would come through. So we set up an online ordering portal with eco products of all the stuff that the compost facilities actually wanted to see come through the compost. And then we also had that with the sponsors, because we kept on banning things from the sponsors to hand out, like koozies, chapstick, pamphlets, like all this stuff we just kept on banning and they weren't allowed to give. So then we made an online ordering portal of all the sustainable promotional gear that was approved, because since we sort through everything, we really got to notice what is coming through the waste stream and where we either need to educate more, and also the stuff that we just need to ban from the event. Just for time, I'm gonna skip over like the company culture, but I also wanna now talk about how to get less trashy. This is something that we're working on within the town of Burlington, is a reusable takeout system. And this is what we set up with Planet Bluegrass, which is one of our clients in Lyons, Colorado. It is a fully reusable plate, bowl, flatware system for over, well, just under 7,000 attendees for 3 days. So I'll show you a couple moments of this. Let me know if it doesn't go through. Vice President here, event that you're proud to be able to show off. A lot of times we get asked why we started a reusable plate system instead of just sticking with single-use compostable products. And the reason for that is it still takes a lot of energy to produce single-use compostable products, where with reusing, you'll reuse the product a couple dozen times and it will start to pay off for itself with saving all the extra energy costs and the transportation. My name is Marina McCoy and I am the Sustainability Supervisor for Planet Bluegrass. When you arrive to Rocky Grass or Folks Fest, you'll notice our reusable plate system. And you go up to the food vendor. You don't have to bring anything with you. You go up there, you order your food. They serve it to you on all the reusable plates. You go and eat the yummy food. You bring it back to one of our beautiful waste stations, and there's a section for plates. You then drop the plate off. If you have any leftover food, throw it into the compost, leave it there, and then our awesome volunteers would go around, pick up the plates from the bins, bring them back to, we call it the dish pit, where they'll be washed and then cleaned all over again and sent back to the food vendors. Our vendors at Rocky Grass and Folks Fest are pretty amazing. They are big leaders in sustainability by innovating every single time that they come to the festival. So that's just a little sneak peek of what we were able to do. That was a couple years ago and definitely had some room for improvement. We put a commercial dishwasher into a trailer, so it was completely portable. We had similar numbers as Marissa, like the first year that we did it, where we lost 35% of the inventory, but after some education, a lot of signage, just like at every point of contact, we were able to get down to just 8% loss the following year. So that was really cool to see. And as we wrap up, there you go. This is just a little more breakdown. We would store things in tubs. Everything would go through and they were left to air dry, completely compliant with the Boulder County Health Code. And yeah, so this is what we're working on now, doing R&D work to set up the fully reusable takeout system. And our goal is to have it be community shared. So that way it also reaches minority owned restaurants. Because right now, if you look at in Brooklyn, New York, they have different reusable systems for restaurants, but because there's different competition, that means that now people have to figure out, well, remember which reusable container goes to which restaurant, and also the restaurants that are participating usually are the ones that can afford to do so and have the capacity, which leaves out a lot of other restaurants. So the goal with what we're trying to do within Burlington, and hopefully it goes into a state initiative, is to really make sure that every restaurant can participate. And I can't show what the reusable trail looks like now due to NDAs and partnerships with Globlit, but we've enhanced it. It could wash 10,000 units in one day. And we also are going to be using QR codes to track and have it through the app. So yeah, fingers crossed that we could get this going, at least a pilot program, before January of next year. And thank you all for sticking with me.
Awesome, Marina. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm sure people have lots of questions. I know just off the top, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what that looks like, or what you imagine that looked like. You were telling us in a discussion recently, kind of more the details, but I think it could be kind of that trailer setup that you had in Colorado could go to like waterfront Burlington events where there might have 10,000 people over the course of a day. I don't know if they get quite that high, but a lot, many thousands of people creating trash. And historically, City of Burlington and other event organizers have done a really good job at using compostable products instead of single-use disposable. But now with us closing the door to those and making it more difficult, it's really appealing for me, as the one who's shutting that, or to hear that there is potentially a good alternative, and then for that to potentially transcend to the restaurants who generate a huge amount of takeout. If you could just speak for a minute or two more about that and what that might look like.
Yeah, so originally we wanted to work with Burlington Parks and Rec to have one of the reusable trailers at the waterfront for all the events. And what happened there was, one, COVID. We were able to work their Kids Day and July 3rd before COVID actually happened. But everything was put on side with us. Like when I say work with Burlington Parks and Rec, they didn't really have involvement. It was just talking to them about how this could happen. And since as a company, we were just getting busier and busier, like our clients, 85% of our clients used to be outside the state of Vermont. So it just got pushed back. And now due to COVID, we've been hanging here and hoping that we could have a station down by the waterfront to get all those events on board, but then also having the takeout system for the restaurants too. So it's no longer a trailer, it's actually a storage container. And the dishwashing is actually engineered just for this purpose. So it goes really fast. That's how we're able to get 10,000 units cleaned within a day. What we are running into and why we're going off the community shared system and having it owned through the community is just running the numbers. It's not like a very profitable business, which is why it's gotten pushed back so much on us, because we're like a small startup and just don't have the funds to make it happen. But honestly, with this push of not having compostable products being accepted, we're starting to see more traction for it. And like we're applying to, Bernie Sanders launched an email about proposals for innovative products. So like we're hoping to at least get in front of more people. This was helpful as well. But yeah, that's the whole plan. It would be great by next summer to have the stuff there. And the containers are already built. It's just a matter of the finances to bring it here, and then also to have all the inventory of the stuff. So yeah, if anyone knows of like grants and things, let me know, because we really want to make it happen. Oh, and how it would work is that we can't think of linens and rags at restaurants. They just put a bag of the stuff behind the restaurant and gets picked up. That's essentially how the reusable takeout system would work, because we don't want to put that on the restaurants. And that's where the community shared system goes into play too, because we want to be price competitive with how much they're spending on takeout right now. So we would be going around picking up the stuff and then running them through the reusable trail and then dropping them back off.
All right, one tiny thing, then we can open it up to other people who have important questions. Is I assume that upfront capital costs are significant for that, but once those are met, and hopefully it seems like it'd be ripe for grant funding. But once those are met, is the ongoing operational expenses, are those significant, or do you think there would be a chance, like if the capital were taken care of, that it could be,
Oh yeah, like once it's running, it's fine. It's just the upfront cost that's pretty significant. But yeah, with doing the analysis of, and we're still working on it, but just how much the restaurants spend themselves on one, trash, because they're not going to be inheriting that trash, then on compostable products, and then through the QR codes and tracking with the community members, like there will be charges if they're not returning stuff too. But we're really trying to be sensitive of the price put on to especially minority groups as well. Like we don't want people to be disincentivized from spending like one night out for takeout. So really, again, pushing that community shared system instead. So that's like helping everyone else out and it doesn't create more competition.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Marina, very much.
Yeah.
And Marissa, before you, they were both excellent presentations. I think Natasha, you've been watching the questions coming in. You want to unleash?
Yes. So, and we have just about 10 minutes, so I might jump around a little bit, but I'm going to start with a question for you, Dan. When CSWD moves to not accepting certified compostable food service wares, the question is about how, like, will you still be accepting? I mean, I know you don't want to be accepting them, but what about when they come in from post-consumer household load? So that, like we talked about UVM system in bigger institutions, but there's also this what sneaks in from a residential load. And so the question is, are you concerned that you'll still end up with contaminants like milk cartons, plastic film, et cetera? And what is the sort of educational approach that you're using to address this, as opposed to like just focusing on the product and like the list of things that aren't accepted?
Sure. Yeah. No, well, we recognize very much that the best way to solve our problem is to limit everything, limit what's coming in on the front end and doing a better job of educating folks upstream before it even gets to our facility. As a lot of compost facilities in Vermont, well, sometimes compost facilities do their own hauling, and they have that ability to check containers when they're at the pickup, and they have an easier job because of it. So we don't have that. Instead, we do have, CSWD has a robust outreach and education team, and they're going to be ramping up messaging and visiting with businesses once we're past COVID worries, and institutions and residents, not individual homes, but reaching out to residents and making sure that they get this message, because the acceptance policy will be throughout all of those sectors, residential included. We will not be accepting those materials from residential or commercial or institutional. Liner bags, again, being the important exception. If it's a certified compostable liner bag, we'll take those even from residential. So it's a big task, and we recognize that we're not going to catch them all. There will be incoming materials that we will have to still watch for and screen. But the biggest step forward in all this is that we'll actually be able to do that. We'll actually be able to recognize them in a way that we can't now, because they're intermingled with good and bad plastics. So.
Follow-up question. Are you establishing relationships with any of the haulers? I know some haulers, compost facility hauler relationships have actually shifted some of this and have trained and worked with their haulers to do some of that load pre-screening at the residential level.
Yeah, we've opened communication with all the haulers, and we're actually delighted that there's a lot of new haulers who really want to do the right thing. And we anticipate working with them and probably having some economic incentive for haulers and generators who can provide a clean stream, that they would pay a lower tip fee for dropping material than, kind of what we're seeing now, or what we will eventually be considering a contaminated load. So yeah, we definitely will be working with them to try to figure out how to get as far along in that as we can, as quickly as possible.
Great, thank you. And I will just note that there are some questions that were asked in chat that have been answered in chat. So initially I'm going to skip those. People can read through that. And if we have time, I'll circle back to them. And so this next question, I'm not sure. I don't know the answer. So maybe one of you do. It's not for anyone in particular. What about commercial scale tumblers? Do those do a better job of breaking down bioplastics? Do we know that?
So there's, all sorts of compost facilities use different technologies. And for us, it's not really the case that they're not breaking down well enough. That occasionally that happens, and that's a minor problem. For us, it's more the fact that we can't distinguish between what's going to eventually break down and what is not. So it doesn't matter if we're using an aerated static pile compost system or a windrow system or an in-vessel system. It's really the fact that it's obscuring what we really don't want in there, which is the trash.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Thank you. Marissa, this is a question for you. Is the EcoWare program optional or voluntary, or is it mandated for all staff and students?
Good question. It is. It was voluntary prior to COVID, and I don't know how clearly I outlined this, but now that we have our mobile ordering system, those orders automatically get packed into EcoWare. So anytime a student is, there are a few exceptions to some of the retail locations on campus where we have prioritized our EcoWare container usage in resident dining, which is that cafeteria style dining. But if a student places an order through resident dining, through our mobile ordering app, it is automatically packed into EcoWare. The caveat being, unless we run out of containers at a location, and then we do have compostables on hand for backup, which happens. I mean, we move it around campus, but it's a pretty big campus, so sometimes it takes a day.
Great, thank you. And a follow-up question to that is, what do you think that the students do with the EcoWares when they fail to return them? Are they putting them in recycle bins or trash, or keeping them in their kitchen cabinets? Is this like, the free kitchenware for students?
Right. We did have a dining staff find one at Habitat for Humanity for sale. Yeah.
For sale. Nice.
Yeah. So it's the biggest mystery to me. I think again, and I saw another question about, installing the roll carts into academic buildings. I did see that question. I think it all just kind of, it speaks to this, like what motivates human behavior, what motivates the students to return them. We have a really close relationship with our custodial staff across campus, and they do typically report to us when they're finding them in trash rooms or in trash cans. Everyone has done a really great job on campus of kind of rallying around this in terms of staff. I don't think that they're ending up in the trash for the most part. I think that they're just sort of being left in res halls. I'm nervous to see what happens when we break for the semester and, res life goes through and cleans out dorm rooms. I have a feeling we're going to get some science experiments back. And then just in terms of, and if you don't mind me just sort of jumping ahead to this other question, I think, in terms of sustainability behavior, and I think Marina's sort of spoken to this, and Dan, I think it's the struggle that we all see is that you can put the infrastructure in place, but it's getting the end consumer to make that conscious decision to return it or to put it in the right bin or to bring it back. There's the disconnect there somewhere. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is we do offer about 30 locations on campus where students can return all over campus. So it's pretty ubiquitous, the return bins. And so I don't know that, putting them, and then the amount of work it takes on our end in terms of staffing, and everyone is short-staffed, custodial is short-staffed, dining is short-staffed, and there are only so many students. So I think it's really this big systems change in terms of how do you motivate that end user behavior is, I think, the biggest question for all of us. I mean, I don't want to speak for Dan and Marina, but I think it's something that we've all sort of seen.
Yeah, no, thank you. And we already touched on the hauler questions, that you're not necessarily the right person for that, but maybe we can coordinate, and I'll include a link, some contact information when I post this webinar in the slide decks.
Great.
So Marina, some folks are commenting that your presentation is an excellent reframing of the goals for events, right? So like, what does it actually mean to get away from diversion and actually reduce what we're producing, and also boo to greenwashing, but that this is really exciting. And so one question specifically for you, Marina, is if there would be drop-off places around Burlington, or would the consumer have to bring the reusables back to the location where they got them?
Yeah, and I just, good timing, because I answered it in the chat, but to give it more context. So again, like, we want to make sure that this system is as accessible as possible, but also doesn't put the burden on the restaurants or the partners that we partner up with. But ideally, there would be multiple drop-off stations throughout the town, and that's where the QR code comes in, knowing that there will be a small percentage of the population that doesn't have a smartphone, but ideally, like, it will be set up through that. And partnering with places, this is all just ideas, not, I haven't confirmed anything, but like City Market, who might also be using the containers, and we would have a drop-off center. We don't want them to worry about washing them themselves or having to collect. Like, it will run independently. Libraries as well too, like having the bins outside that obviously, like, you just drop it in and it's locked so that people aren't breaking into them. But that's what we're thinking about, to make sure that the burden isn't just on the restaurants or the partners, but also isn't on the consumer.
Great. Yeah, a comment just came in. Let's sort of like bike sharing programs, right? That it's like dining ware sharing programs. We are really just about out of time. I guess my parting thing that I'll just say is, I wonder what, Marina, through events, you've done such a good job and gave a lot of examples about driving consumer behavior and changing that. And we don't really have time to get into it today, but I'll just leave everybody with the thought of, is there something that we can learn, whether it's in dining, or on university campuses or in institutions or even in households, from the event model. Clearly, there's not the same level of competition and signage and some hand-holding that happens at events, but I do feel like somehow there's some of these concepts that might be transferable to treating a dining hall as an event, and some of that overlay. So I'm sorry we didn't have really a chance to get into that today. I want to thank all of our presenters for sharing their amazing stories. Super interesting and exciting stuff happening. And Dan, thanks for organizing. Thank you to all of the participants for spending some of your afternoon with us here today. Just a really quick reminder that we do have 2 sessions left today that are concurrent at 3 p.m. The food scrap diversion strategies for multi-unit complexes, and then a virtual tour of Windham Solid Waste Management District's compost facility at 3 today. And then we start again at 10 a.m. tomorrow with a session connecting farms to communities to close the nutrient loop. So we hope that folks will be able to continue joining us throughout the week for the summit program. And a very quick reminder that at the end of the week, everybody will be getting an email with a link to an online evaluation. So please just take a minute or two to fill that out. And don't forget to check out the CAV auction. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.